In my presentation to you today, I would be covering adopting humanitarian law to asymmetrical warfare. Although it is said that wars are inevitable, yet even the wars have limits. And this is what is international humanitarian law all about. You are aware, as of date, the armed conflict taking place in Israel, in the Gaza Strip, in Ukraine, Russia war, and at other locations around the world. We would be talking about asymmetrical warfare, and this is part of the multidisciplinary perspectives in understanding and resolving conflicts. In this session, I will tell you as to what is meant by asymmetrical war, what are its features, significance, consequences, and also how can these disputes be brought to an end. Asymmetrical war is also called irregular or indirect warfare. This term at various stages has also been discussed as guerrilla warfare, insurgency, counter-insurgency, terrorism, or counter-terrorism. Asymmetry, the very word, indicates lacking symmetry or something that is not in tune with the other. For example, a triangle is not in tune with other features, geometrical shapes of having four corners. Coming to the war domain, asymmetrical war is a type of warfare between opposing forces that differ greatly in military power, their numerical strength, and there is a competition between the state and non-state actors today. They try and seek legitimacy and also indicate their influence over the relevant population of that jurisdiction. Asymmetrical war is called or classified as a fourth generation warfare. It includes all the wars in which one of the major participants is not a state but rather a non-state actor. The examples of asymmetrical warfare, of course, in India, a classical example is the battles that Shivaji waged against the Mughal forces, also the Mexican Revolution, Arabs when they fought First Chechen War, etc. The slide here shows the progressive changes from first generation to fifth generation warfare, and what do they indicate is shown in that. Other examples in India besides Shivaji is of Bajirao I, and beyond India, Tito, what he waged against German army during Second World War and the conflict that raged for centuries and decades in Northern Ireland. Usually, on one side are the national armies, militaries, and facing them, opposing them, may be armed partitions who make use of different features like hijacking, hostages, etc. The challenges that it poses is that technical advantages cannot be put to use. You can't use aerial bombardment against the opponent in such a situation. Civilians always face large risks, and there are certain elements of this type of warfare. Usually it's a direct attack on enemy's culture, and pressure is sought to be applied by various means like political, social, economic, and military, and these wars are long drawn. Low intensity conflict, the term one may have come across, is also related to such situations. They show a lack of hierarchy. One of the sizes is a small, usually it is spread out. They follow insurgency tactics. What are the causes that lead to, that give birth or bring about asymmetrical warfare? They are there on the slide in front of you. Think about, say, the conflict in Sri Lanka. What are the normal results or usual consequences? A very major fact is that it blurs the line between civilians and combatants. This is so because large number of civilians take part. As law teachers, one would do well to recall that the two tools or laws available are the Fourth Geneva Convention, a portion of it in some way, and also the Additional Protocol 2. And you may remember that India is not a signatory to Part 1 and Additional Protocol Part 2. There are certain complications. The first is that the common Article 3, which is relating to all four Geneva Convention, is silent with regard to the aspect of detention. And so is the case in AP2. One may also remember that to counter asymmetric warfare, civilians are usually put to great risk of violence. This war, which is of a non-international armed conflict, NIAC is the abbreviation used. There could be two situations. Either it's a civil war where one of the parties has been internationalized, or there are only pressures or rebels, insurrections, etc. A major challenge is to carry out identification, because armed groups, they are in a shape of splinter. Just to illustrate, the problem in Gaza right now has number of insurgent groups as indicated here, Fatah, PPO, Special, PFLP, all are helpers of Hamas. Martin's Clause was the common Article 3 of all the four conventions, which says that in cases which are not covered by the treaty law, you got to follow the established custom, principles of humanity, and the dictates of public conscience. The combatants who take part in asymmetrical warfare, particularly those which are of a non-state actor, they do not qualify and meet the criteria of a full-fledged combatant, because they do not wear a uniform, they do not carry the arms openly, they are not under a known commander. And having regard to the revolving door policy, a person who during the day is engaged in his vocation, but in the night is a fighter. So there are insurgents, terrorist groups, they fight against a state, and they often try and gain military advantage by attacking civilians. It gives them propaganda. One of the difficulties is that apart from variation in size, equipment, training, and tactics, there is also a tendency to disregard the requirement to minimize suffering. Revolving door policy relates to a situation where a civilian during daytime carries out a normal function, and the other time he is a fighter taking part in armed conflict. So he goes out and comes in, goes out and comes in. Now that creates a problem whether he is entitled to protection. And the usual practice is that when he takes part in any armed conflict, for that situation, he loses the protection. These NSAGs, non-state armed groups, carry out detention, as you are aware, was seen at the start of the conflict in Gaza on 7th of October. More than 80 armed groups are there which have these hostages. This warfare also indicates the use or reliance on sleeper cells which are put in place in the other territory, and they are activated at short notice when required. Very often from naval ships, aircraft carriers, etc., the non-state actors are, they try and make use of to strike targets by after taking care not to indicate their intention. Now, there are various disputes relating to the IHL, particularly with regard to the protection, and they can be resolved by the IHL, judicial tribunals, UNO, and other agencies. There is a celibacy judgment of ICTY, where it said that every person in enemy hands has to be either a PW, a prisoner of war, or a civilian. There's no intermediate status. So there's nobody who is outside the clutches of the law. Law is not one-sided, and non-international armed conflict law is binding upon all parties, that is the state as well as the non-state actors. The law concerning asymmetric warfare is all encompassing. There is a universal acceptance and recognition of the international principles of non-discrimination, which is very important. Treat all equally. The victims on both the sides, they need and they deserve the same protection. It is to be remembered that they are not necessarily responsible for the violation that are resorted to, that are carried out by the other side. The other situation is jus in bello, which deals with guidelines for fighting well once the war has begun. Now, how can the compliance be made reciprocal? For that, political context would be essential. This may be even during the fighting, so that a signal goes out that there is a proper understanding for compliance of IHL provisions. To carry out due and requisite compliance, there is a need for ingenuity, and the notion of Geneva call in such situations may prove to be handy for compliance with existing obligations. I've often used the term guerrilla warfare in this presentation. And what is guerrilla warfare? There is a basic mantra provided by Mao Zedong, which said that enemy advances, we retreat. When enemy will camp, we will tire him, and so on. This call is in the context of an independent NGO which is neutral and impartial, so that there is all-round respect for humanitarian norms and principles. The new technologies emerge every day. There are advancements. New patterns of battlefield behavior are also being taken. And for law to march alongside To be able to provide requisite tools, there is a need to develop the law, to restate the law and interpret. And an example in this regard can be given of Article 21 of Indian Constitution. Over the decades, the courts have expanded the reach and meaning of a right to life. And therefore, what is required is resorting to an out-of-box approach and develop soft laws by way of political declarations, military manuals, and documents, do's and don'ts, etc. This will give a new look, or it will restate and enlarge a principle or notion. Moving on, in the cases of asymmetrical warfare, three typical areas in India are, in our context, Naya Kashmir, then Northeast, and the Naxal problem connected to left-wing extremism. Now, how can these be dealt with? So far as J&K is concerned, there's a need to reorganize the security grid, and the statehood that was stood disturbed after abrogation of Article 370 needs to be restored. Similarly, in Northeast, the extortions, forcible recruitments have to be stopped. And this brings to surface an idea that party to a treaty, while accepting it, should make national interpretations or bring out reservations. Therefore, in all such situations, in our sphere, there would be a need to understand and navigate asymmetrical warfare and simultaneously refine and redraft the national security doctrine. Political action is preferable and followed by law enforcement, and it is only in the end that the option of military action should be considered that would minimize casualties and inconvenience. In the end, I would like to emphasize that to combat and contain so as to carry out peaceful resolution of asymmetrical war, diverse means, particularly reinterpretation of the treaty law, would become necessary. Thank you.